are considered one of the absolute greatest bands of all time and produced the most iconic album ever, known as Dark Side of the Moon. However, this band's legacy and what they will always be known for is a complete far cry from what they started as, making this one of the most interesting band discographies I will ever indulge myself in.
Floating down, the sound resounds around the icy waters underground.
In the early 60s, Roger Waters, who had played bass, Nick Mason, drums, Richard Wright, keyboards, and their friend Syd Barrett, who played guitar and sang, formed a group. The group was just a fun little thing until the mid-60s, when they changed their name to the Pink Floyd sound. They of course changed this name to Pink Floyd and was signed with EMI Records in '67 and became professional. They released their very first song, Arnold Lane, which had a lot of weird controversies about it because it was about a transvestite. And they followed up this weird song with See Emily Play. Now, I already mentioned that this band goes through a lot of changes, but these first two singles are already vastly different, in my opinion, from Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is just a pure psychedelic, weird, LSD-infested nuisance, while these two singles sound a lot more like the rock and roll bands of the time, like the Beatles. So they must have really fried their brains going into Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which came out in '67. The album notably either has jams from the band that were put on the album, which I feel are the more natural songs, or songs that were solely written by Syd Barrett, which are just the weird psychedelic. The stronger songs being the opening song Astronomy Domine, Take Up the Stethoscope and Walk, the first Roger Waters song, Matilda Mother, and the instrumental epic Interstellar Overdrive. However, my favorite song on the album is one of the Barrett songs, which has this weird 60s rock vibe to it. A little song with a pretty kick-ass riff called Lucifer Sam. Now, I quite like the first half of this album, but the second half is where it gets pretty weird for me. The Scarecrow is just completely jarring to me. Before we move on, though, I do want to take note of the bizarre song that ends the album that I both love and hate equally. I have no clue what to even think of this song. The sort of hit song from this album called Bike.
I've got a bike, you can ride it if you like. It's got a basket, a bell and rings and things to make it look good. I'd give it to you if I could, but I borrowed.
From all the acid the band was dropping, Syd Barrett began to lose his mind and they began to lose Syd Barrett. But to help the band out with Syd Barrett's problems, they hired a legend named David Gilmour. Now, a lot of fans considered this early period, especially after Piper at the Gates of Dawn, to be a confusing mess because the band didn't really have a leader and they were just trying to get by without knowing what the hell they were trying to do, what direction they were trying to go. However, I strongly disagree that this album is a mess. I love this bizarre album. It's definitely not nearly as jarring or weird. This album, instead of being very psychedelic, to me is more progressive space rock and actually brings us some pretty cool atmosphere on each song. Now in '68 when this album came out, the band was having a ton of problems with Syd Barrett. It almost seemed like the guy had completely lost his mind. They had to have him like mimic performances. With Syd Barrett, they released a single called Apples and Oranges. Also, it's interesting to note that two of Syd Barrett's songs did not make it onto this album, Vegetable Man and Scream Thy Last Scream. So once they got the legend David Gilmour in the band, who is a very good singer, songwriter, and guitarist, they slowly tried to deviate away from what Syd Barrett was trying to do. So they all started writing songs together and it just felt like a disconnected mess, and for a short time the band was actually a 5-piece, but the band soon after got rid of him, leaving just Roger Waters, Rick Wright, David Gilmour and Nick Mason. And some years later, Roger Waters and David Gilmour would form the two defining entities of this band, and the two ugliest men on earth would make some of the best music of all time. So on this album, Saucerful of Secrets, we get a lot of really cool songs like Let There Be More Light, Remember a Day, all just really atmospheric and bizarre. And Corporal Clegg, which shows Roger Waters' distaste for the military, a song that Nick Mason actually sings. However, there's songs that are even more memorable than the ones I've named, making this one of my more favorite albums for sure. My favorite song being the really defining space rock song, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. I mean, that's basically about space.
Set the controls for the heart of the sun.
Before I mention my least favorite song, I have to mention this one song on the album that doesn't really get a lot of credit. A really interesting song about a girl drowning that's sung by Rick Wright and written by Rick Wright, called Seesaw. It's very melodic, very catchy. Now my least favorite song is the last song on the album. The Syd Barrett song, Jug Band Blues, just kinda does nothing for me.
I don't care if the sun doesn't shine, and I don't care if nothing is mine, and I don't care if I'm nervous with you.
The rest of the album, I urge you to check out. It is very, very strong, song for song until Jug Band Blues. Now, for me and a lot of people, More signals the beginning of the Confusion era, which lasts for 2 albums of the band just not knowing what the hell to do with themselves. So they decided to randomly make a film soundtrack for some weird movie that no one cares about called More. And boy is this album weird. Most of it is instrumental songs, of course, because it's a film soundtrack, so it definitely puts it on the bottom for a lot of people's favorite Pink Floyd albums, definitely. I wouldn't say it's terrible, but it's nothing special. Most of this album is very weak due to the fact that a lot of these songs are instrumental, weird songs, and pretty much more than half the album is instrumentals, and all of them are nothing special except for Spanish Piece. I quite like that one. But man, are the highlights pretty high for me. Ibza Bar is pretty cool. The Crying song I quite like. And the way the album starts is just really weird and creepy with this very atmospheric song called Cirrus Minor. Now, I don't know why, but for some reason, a lot of people recently state that the Nile song is like the first heavy metal song. It's pretty heavy and kick-ass, but it's definitely not heavy metal. I do also want to note, because David Gilmour's vocal performance on the Nile song is so badass, every song on this album is actually sung by David Gilmour except for the instrumental songs, and he gives a very good performance on everything, showing how damn good of a singer he is. Now, worst song is definitely Quicksilver, just absolutely torturously boring. And the best song, there's a lot of really good highlights in the first half, but for my money, Cymbeline is just such a catchy, great song.
And it's high time, Cymbeline. It's high time, Cymbeline.
This is one of those albums that I definitely recommend checking out last because it just feels so disconnected. I mean, it is a film soundtrack and it has like no cohesiveness to it at all. But hey, the first half of this album definitely has a lot of cool stuff to it. Now, in the same year, in 1969, Pink Floyd put out the absolute weirdest album ever. Bizarre double album known as Ummagumma. Everything is weird about this album. The title, which I think is supposed to be like slang for sex. The album artwork, which is confusing. The first half of this album is a live performance, and then the second half is total confusion and disconnection. Now let's first talk about the live side of the album, which is pretty decent live recordings, especially like Set Controls of the Heart of the Sun and Saucerful of Secrets. But the most notable thing about this is the avant-garde, completely original song called Careful that Axe Eugene, which, let's be honest, on paper, it's awful. A song that builds up to a scream and then just like jams over the scream for like 9 minutes. Sounds terrible, right? But this is one of their most awesome songs somehow, and I have no clue why, and easily the best thing off this album. Then we get to the studio side of this album. Okay, so apparently Wright had this glorious idea to have every member write their own lengthy piece and have their own like part of the album. So Wright wrote Sisyphus, I like to call it Syphilis, which is an overly long, crazy, random piano solo that goes absolutely nowhere and takes forever to get there. Roger Waters writing a pretty good song, Grantchester Meadows, and then the most bizarre, hilarious song ever. And I'm not reading this off Wikipedia, okay? I have this song title memorized, okay? Several species of small, furry animals gathered together in a cave and groving with a pict. Easily the most listenable part of the studio album is the overlong but has a pretty good payoff, catchy song from David Gilmour, The Narrow Way, which has 3 parts to it. Most of it's pointless, but the last part, pretty nice stuff, I gotta say. And then we go from the best part of the studio side to the worst part, the Grand Vizier's Garden Party. Now, this album was very interesting, bizarre, funny, and just overall interesting. Even if it's terrible, you have to admit, it's a pretty interesting album. But I can laugh and enjoy for what it is every song on this, but the Grand Vizier's Garden Party is the only exception. This song is just so bad. It goes nowhere. Absolutely nowhere for almost 9 minutes. Now, a lot of Pink Floyd fans argue that the beginning of their classic sound that they would become known for started on the album that comes out after this, Meddle. But for my money, Pink Floyd starts at this point. You want to get into Pink Floyd, you want to go back to where this classic sound truly begins, it's Atom Heart Mother. A lot of you are going to be like, huh? What? What do you mean it's the start of the sound? And sure, there is a kind of weird song on it, but this is truly the beginning of their classic sound. Pink Floyd began experimenting with what would become their classic style, fusing classic prog rock that was forming at this time, along with their bizarre, odd psychedelic jams. And that starts with the title track, an instrumental 20-minute suite known as Atom Heart Mother that has a lot of great progression to it. I still don't get why people think Meddle's the beginning of this sound, because honestly, Atom Heart Mother, even though it's instrumental, very much mirrors Echoes, which everyone hails as the best Pink Floyd song. And every single suite that they've ever done is very similar in style to Atom Heart Mother. It is, of course, my favorite song in the album. It just shows off so many great ideas. And to make the song more epic, they got Ron Geeson to add orchestration and choirs to the song to make it even more epic. Overall, this album feels a lot more mature compared to the albums before, which were very, very weird. This album feels like a straightforward progressive rock album of the time. There's a lot of really good songs in the second side, like If, Fat Old Son. For me, my favorite short song on the album is the Wright song Summer 68, which has a really awesome chorus. Now, even though this is the beginning of their classic sound, I think a lot of people dismiss this album because the band doesn't like it, and because the final song in the album, a 13-minute song with 3 parts about a guy eating cereal called Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast. It's weird and kind of a chore to get through, but honestly, it's not bad. It's just kind of weird. But the rest of the album is a far cry from this type of weird stuff that they did in the past. 1971's Meddle is like a companion album to Atom Heart Mother. They continue to go into this progressive psychedelic sound that they would continue to refine on each album. It starts out with One of These Days, which is just like a build-up until you get to the end of the song where they go into a really kick-ass jam. It's mostly instrumental, but I believe there's some yelling from Nick Mason on there. Pillow of Winds is a really cool, soft David Gilmour song, and Saint-Tropez is a pretty weird Roger Waters song, but I still quite like it. Now, I've noticed that a lot of people nowadays seem to say, Meddle is the best album, it's an undiscovered gem, it's perfect. But have you guys even listened to Seamus? Which of course is my pick for the worst song on the album. It features a dog barking so loud in the mix it seriously makes me a huge supporter of euthanasia.
Seamus, that's the dog who's outside.
Then we have the amazing ending to the album, what many consider to be the best song. Of course, Echoes. It's not really a suite because it's not really in many parts, but what's so cool about it is that it has a continuous flow throughout. It feels very natural, unlike many other suites that are just bits of songs put together. This feels like a full, not boring 20-minute song. However, I do have to admit that the middle part is kind of weird. One last thing I want to mention, of course, is the Live in Pompeii video that they did. Of course, what you're seeing right now. And what's interesting about this is that it was an absolutely amazing live video. But to make it weird, they played in an ancient stadium in Pompeii that had an attendance of 0 to create this weird feel that they were like playing to an audience of no one or something like that. It's really weird, but they had like a lot of creepy visuals and stuff of like people dying from the volcano. Easily one of the best live videos ever, and it truly shows the band at the top of their game.
3, 4.
1972's Obscured by Clouds I always jokingly call the album that stops me from getting to Dark Side of the Moon, because Meddle sound-wise pretty much leads into Dark Side of the Moon for me, but of course they decided to release Obscured by Clouds first. Even though they actually wrote and recorded Dark Side of the Moon first, they decided to write and release this film soundtrack called Obscured by Clouds, and honestly, except for the first and last song, which are my picks of the worst on the album, especially the last one, Absolutely Curtains, which is just dreadful. I mean, other than those two songs, it doesn't feel like a soundtrack. It actually feels like a bunch of pretty cool rock songs, but it honestly feels more like a detour to what they were doing before, because it doesn't feel as psychedelic. It just feels like a Beatles album or something, but hey, it's pretty good for what it is, I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of really cool songs on this, and I think they even had a hit single with the Waters song Free Fall. The best song in this album is the David Gilmour song Childhood's End.
You shout in your sleep. Perhaps the price is just too steep. Is your conscience at rest?
Man, what can I say that hasn't already been said about the greatest album of all time, 1973's Dark Side of the Moon? Well, I first want to start with the band even knew that there was something special about this album going into it. They were extremely collaborative while writing it. They didn't focus all their efforts in one specific sound to make it sound super progressive, super jazzy, super bluesy or anything. It all just feels like a big mix of everything, and it honestly transcends what we're supposed to think of rock music and music itself. Some say that the album's a thematic concept album, and the next couple Pink Floyd albums will be thematic concept albums. I don't necessarily think that, but a lot can argue that all the themes in this album revolve around human nature. Now, the most important thing about this album for me and why it stands as the best album ever, I mean, a lot of you might be like, it's overrated and I never understood why it gets all the praise. The reason is that this is the one album of all albums where if you think of the album, you don't think of any songs. You just think of the entity that is Dark Side of the Moon. And that is what the whole album format is supposed to be about. The album format is like a movie, you know, not like a TV show. It's a full-on movie. And it's really hard to get music and albums to come off that way where it feels like a movie, not just a bunch of songs that you can critique. Every bit on this album bleeds into the next flawlessly, like it's all one big song. Like I said, one big entity, one big album. And it honestly has such a magical feel about it. It's just the right length. It goes through just the right motions. It goes through all the emotions. This would be the last album for a long time to feature Wright on vocals, and he gives some really cool psychedelic vocals to some of these songs, especially Breathe in the Air. There's a lot of really cool moments throughout this album. Of course, Time is amazing, and it kind of reprises Breathe. What's cool is the Wright instrumental piece, The Great Gig in the Sky, was just kind of like a build-up and then a jam. And he said that this song's supposed to represent, like, the destruction of mankind and the start of new. So they would have like apocalyptic visuals and stuff like that. So he told Claire Torrey, who did like vocal screams over top of the track, to imagine that type of atmosphere. And her screams almost work as like a lead instrument, like a guitar doing a really emotional, powerful, moving solo. Of course, the lead single, Money, it is a little overplayed, but let's admit, this song rules.
First class traveling section, I think I need a lift.
The little instrumental bits are really cool too. I cannot listen to this album without those bits. In fact, I never listened to a song in this album. I always listen to the whole thing. It ends incredibly with Brain Damaging Eclipse, arguably the best album ending of all time. And even though Roger Waters was starting to build up as like the lead force of the band and would soon take over in a couple albums, this would be the last full collaborative album. But Roger only sang on like the last two songs, which is really interesting. Now for me, the one song that I haven't talked too much about yet stands as my favorite song from the album, even though everything is just so damn good to me. I don't look at it as songs, it's supposed to be just the entity itself. But my favorite bit, of course, is the incredibly magical sounding Us and Them. I also want to mention that this album got a lot more attention and this mysterious presence around it when a bunch of stoners decided to play this album along with Wizard of Oz, and it apparently matched up perfectly, dude. Yeah, the people that actually think this album matches up perfectly with Wizard of Oz are the same people that probably think that jet fuel can't melt steel beams. Dark Side of the Moon started a trilogy of amazing albums. 3 of the best albums ever. Of course, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and Animals. And you could argue that Wish You Were Here is the most consistent of all of them because all 5 songs, well, technically all 4 songs, are all equally good, while Dark Side of the Moon, you kind of have to think of its own entity or else you'll find weak spots. Now, even though this began their best period, starting with Dark Side of the Moon and its huge success, the band started to become less and less collaborative as the years went on. Roger Waters originally wanted to call this album Wish We Were Here because it felt like the band, after hitting such a big milestone, Dark Side of the Moon, that there was just no communication and no friendship anymore. And Roger was starting to kind of chase success. The band didn't really talk much and they were all kind of in their own box. Roger Waters, David Gilmour, and Rick Wright all contribute songwriting-wise. However, Rick Wright does not have any vocals on the album at all. So Syd Barrett, of course, was kicked out of the band years ago, but apparently Shine You Crazy Diamond, the suite on this album, is based on, of course, Syd Barrett, and apparently when they were rehearsing it and recording it, Syd Barrett just randomly arrived while they were working on it. He was really fat and bald, and it seemed like his brain was somewhere else. So it was kind of sad, and it added a bit more power and mystery to this album. The album starts out in such a weird, unorthodox way with a lot of ambient build-ups. When it kicks into the riffs, it really feels powerful. Now, they actually split the song in half. They put the first 13 minutes at the start of the album and the last 12 minutes at the end of the album. One of the only times I've ever seen a prog band bookend their suite on both ends of the album, and it really works. Now, this album is kind of like a loosely based concept album, because you could argue that this album, lyric-wise, is about the band, because, of course, Shine You Crazy Diamond is about Syd Barrett, of course. But then you come to songs like Welcome to the Machine, which is a really dark song that has David Gilmour on vocals, which lyrically is about success. Same with Have a Cigar, where Have a Cigar is just kind of about selling out and giving into the big dollar. And that honestly might be my favorite song on the album, Have a Cigar. That song just has such an infectious groove to it, and the solo kicks total ass. To most people I've met that have listened to this album, including myself, we all thought that Roger Waters sang the song. But actually, a man named Roy Harper came in and did vocals on this song. And of course, the last song I want to talk about is the title track, the song that's hailed as the most powerful and moving song they've ever done. This song shows David Gilmour and Roger Waters not only working together as a team for one of the last times, but working together as truly best friends.
How I wish you were here. We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl.
But I love how the picture shows two guys doing a handshake at a studio, and one of the guys is getting burned, which of course represents the music industry. Even though Roger Waters didn't completely dominate the songwriting yet, this is where Roger Waters started to take control of the band, and power truly went to his head. 1977's Animals is another thematic concept album. A lot of the songs comparing humans and human nature to animals, and also, of course, drawing inspiration from Animal Farm, the book. Just like Wish You Were Here, it bookends two halves of one song. This time, though, it's a really short song, Pigs on the Wing, Part 1 and 2. But the middle three songs are, of course, dogs, pigs, three different ones. I don't know why they call it that. And then sheep. Dogs representing people that are violent and fight to get what they want. Pigs representing people that are privileged, rich, and have a lot of power. And then sheep, people that just follow the pigs because the dogs tell them to. It's a really cool concept with just incredible, heavy progressive music to go with it. And I'd argue this is probably their heaviest album. All the riffs are really catchy. And if you think Pink Floyd's music is boring on stuff like Wish You Were Here, a little understandable. There's a lot of ambient kind of dull sections, but this, man, if you want some heavy Pink Floyd, this is where you go. Honestly, I move around my top three, which of course is the trilogy of awesomeness from Pink Floyd. And this one is probably my personal favorite, but I would argue that's maybe the weakest out of the three, because Pigs on the Wing is Another interesting thing to note is that most of this album, Dogs and Sheep, were actually written for Wish You Were Here. But because the atmosphere of Wish You Were Here was much more simplistic and atmospheric and less prog and jammin' and heavy, they decided to leave it for this album and make this the more jam and catchy album. What sucks, though, is that Dogs was originally a bit longer, a little bit more dynamic. It was originally titled You Gotta Be Crazy, and it's a David Gilmour piece.
After a while, you can work on points for style, like a club tie and the firm handshake.
then, of course, Sheep being Roger Waters' song originally called Raving and Drooling. What sucks, though, is, like I said, the disconnect started to really hit the band. Roger Waters wrote most of this whole album. He didn't even let Rick Wright do anything, and Rick Wright was pissed off. So Rick Wright, I believe, quit the band or something like this during this era, but he was getting paid as like a touring musician and just to like do a couple features on albums. So he was actually getting paid more from being outside the band. So Roger started to get out of control. He sang way too much, he wrote too much, he dominated too much. He spit in a fan's face for some reason. That apparently sparked the idea for The Wall. And he was so full of himself that to go to shows and stuff, the band would, of course, like have cars and cabs and like buses take them. Well, he would like hire private jets and helicopters. So 1979's prog rock double album epic, The Wall, is heralded as one of the absolute best albums ever and the best double album ever. This story is about, of course, Roger Waters. His dad dies in the war. His teachers were mean to everyone. His mom loved him, which I don't know how that's a problem or a brick in the wall. He wants to have sex. He gets addicted to drugs. He beats his wife and is a total asshole. And then, like, starts being a racist douchebag on stage. It's like Roger Waters was unapologetic to himself and how much of a dick he was, because this is totally about him, and he just paints himself as such an asshole, so I don't know why he just doesn't stop being such an asshole, but whatever. Now, Roger Waters completely dominates on this album, and if it weren't for Bob Ezrin, the amazing producer on this album, I gotta admit, that if it weren't for him, David Gilmour would have had nothing to do with this album, and it would have been completely Roger Waters. He wouldn't have had any writing credits, any vocals, and honestly, that's why the first side stands out so much more, because David has way more soloing, way more contribution. It feels more like a cohesive band effort. But it's also interesting to note that even though it's like a classic Pink Floyd album, it's not defining of what their sound is. In fact, this album is a complete different approach to what they did. There's not a single long song. None of it's really psychedelic. It's just kind of like epic rock. There's some really great songs, of course, In the Flesh, The Thin Ice, the Brick in the Wall Suite, I guess you could say, which is a Brick in the Wall Part 1, Happiest Days of Our Lives, another Brick in the Wall Part 2, another Brick in the Wall Part 2 being the most classic song off this whole album. Mother's a really great song. Goodbye Blue Sky is a favorite of mine. I absolutely love the atmosphere of that one. Then we start getting into some random bits like Empty Spaces, which was originally longer for the Wall movie and originally intended to be longer. Young Lust is an awesome David Gilmour song. Hey You's awesome and has some cool atmosphere, and honestly, it's the first Pink Floyd song I ever heard. Then, Is There Anybody Out There, even though it's only credited to Roger Waters, it was actually Bob Ezrin who wrote the song. Comfortably Numb, which of course for its last time shows the incredible collaborative force of Roger Waters and David Gilmour. My favorite song on the album, Run Like Hell, it credits David Gilmour and Roger Waters as vocals. I know that they both sing it live, but honestly, I only hear Roger's voice singing this song, so like I said, it's filled with some great ideas, and I definitely recommend checking it out without a doubt. It is considered a classic. In 1983, Pink Floyd released the final album with Roger Waters, another loosely based concept album about the Falklands War that started at the time. Now, apparently a lot of people think this is the sequel to The Wall because it's thematically a little bit similar, talking about his dad dying, but as we saw, The Wall is about Roger Waters, and this album has some themes about Roger Waters, because of course Roger Waters wrote like all of it. Another reason people think this is because David Gilmour said that he didn't want to do rehashed Wall material, but the only song he was talking about was a song that became The Hero's Return, but was originally known as Teacher Teacher for The Wall, and good thing they kept it off there, because Hero's Return, Teacher Teacher sucks. Now this shows the full transformation of Roger Waters to the pretentious douche he is. However, what's interesting is that this time around, instead of Roger like forcefully dominating everything, he was letting the rest of the band write stuff, but no one decided to, because David Gilmour admits that the only reason that this album is completely dominated by Roger is because David wouldn't participate at all. So there are some really cool songs on it, and once again, instead of being more like prog, psychedelic jams and cool stuff that they originally did, this album just feels like weird melodic rock with like Roger Waters whispering or yelling really badly. There's some really cool songs, mostly the book-ending songs, Post-War Dream, Your Possible Pasts, The Final Cut, Not Now, John, Two Suns in the Sunset. Everything else in the middle is pure awfulness, especially my least favorite song, The Fletcher Memorial Home.
Reagan and Haig, Mr. Bacon, friend, Mrs. Thatcher, the Paisley, Mr. Brezhnev.
But there's one cool song in the middle, a really awesome song called The Gunner's Dream. Not Now, John is the only song that even features David Gilmour. Now, my favorite song is a song that also had a music video to go with it. A really epic and beautiful song that just has such a great chorus hook to it, you know. The title track, The Final Cut.
There's a kid who had a big hallucination. Making love to girls in magazines.
That is one big pile of shit.
An album simply titled A Momentary Lapse of Reason, and more like a momentary lapse of treason. Not only do I think this is the worst Pink Floyd album, but it even received really harsh criticism when it came out. An album that sounds like it's from the 80s, in the middle of the 80s, yet it was completely panned for being 80s and terrible. Because this album pretty much goes against everything that Pink Floyd is about. You know, they were always about doing their own thing, having their own sound, having this cool progressive psychedelic feel. I mean, they strayed away from that a little bit, but they didn't go into like full sellout of the time music territory. But on this album, good God. Roger Waters had taken over Pink Floyd and then decided on the final cut, well, this is the end of Pink Floyd, it's a spent force, no one cares, and I dominate the band. So he left, and then David Gilmour decided, well, I'm going to release a solo album called The Momentary Lapse of Reason, but the record company's like, nope, we're not doing that, so you're going to, you know, have the other members play like one or two things on this album, and then we're going to call it Pink Floyd, and we're going to get outside songwriters to make it sound more like Pink Floyd. What's funny is that some bits in this album feel like they're forced Pink Floyd, like they were actually trying to make it sound like Pink Floyd. It's kind of funny that the album Wish You Were Here, their classic, was calling out the music industry for doing stuff like this, but David Gilmour gave in to temptation and money to make a stupid fake Pink Floyd album. Because at the end of this day, it's just a bad David Gilmour solo album that was made even worse by trying to make it sound like Pink Floyd, and it's not Pink Floyd. A lot of people say Final Cut is the Roger Waters solo album. Honestly, it's very Roger dominated, but I wouldn't say it's a Roger Waters solo album. At least the members play on it. What, Nick Mason plays like the cymbals on a couple songs? Wright smashes his face and ass on the keyboard on like 2 songs? No. Signs of Life, which starts the album, it feels like the record company was like, make Pink Floyd music. You know, I do see a lot of people that say, you know, the album sucks, but on the Turning Away, the single is a great song. I think that's one of the worst goddamn songs of the album. Completely dull and lifeless, and not even Pink Floyd. And like how I said before, how this is an abomination to the big statements that they made on Wish You Were Here. What's up with this album having that 2-part A New Machine? Are they trying to say that this is like the new Wish You Were Here? Because it's the complete opposite, and this song sucks total ass. Yet Another Movie's almost the worst song on this album, just absolutely plodding for 7 minutes. But to me, nothing tops Badness, like the Dogs of War. Even though this album is almost nothing but awful, I gotta say, Sorrow's okay, and you know what? The lead single, Learning to Fly, it's a good song.
Can't keep my eyes from the circling sky. Tongue-tied and twisted, just an earthbound history.
And because of this album being a Pink Floyd album, Roger Waters sued them for the rights of the name, and he kept panning this and Division Bell, calling it fake Pink Floyd and all this stuff. And it's kind of funny because David Gilmour even agrees that this isn't real Pink Floyd because he says this is a solo album. And because of the whole lawsuit over the band name, Pink Floyd could only play songs that I think David Gilmour wrote, like solely, or had writing credits on, so they couldn't play anything that was like solely written by Roger Waters, which really limited their live set quite a bit. On this album, you can feel a little bit more unity with the lineup. Rick Wright is finally back in the picture, and Nick Mason's actually in the picture this time around. But this opens up another can of worms when we talk about the David Gilmour-led era, because on this album, they think, well, Pink Floyd's about slow, boring, ambient stuff, right? So let's do that. There are moments that do remind me of the good and old, like the song What Do You Want From Me, which is my favorite song on the album. It reminds me of Have a Cigar. Take It Back is good fun, and one of my favorite songs from the album is Lost for Words, which reminds me a lot of the song Wish You Were Here. Of course, though, the best song on the album is High Hopes, the ending epic that a lot of people said was like the perfect band ending song, which of course isn't true now because they have another album called, The Endless River.
The grass was greener, the light was brighter.
But even though this has its good moments, it has quite a lot of bad moments, especially songs like Cluster 1, Pulls Apart. The band just thinks Pink Floyd's about being boring and ambient. The Endless River is one of their most interesting to talk about albums. Now, a lot of people, especially a lot of the critics that have panned this album quite a bit, they're going to be like, this is just a bunch of little instrumental bits. It's nothing more, nothing less, which is kind of true. Now, The Endless River, which came out in 2014, was a big instrumental piece that they wrote during the, of course, Division Bell era, and they originally intended that to be a double album, the Division Bell. I believe Rick Wright said that they intended it to be like Ummagumma, where the first half was like real songs, the second half was cool, jamming stuff. It'd be like Ummagumma, but pleasant. And you know what? I like The Endless River more than the Division Bell. Why? Well, the whole album is all instrumental bits, like 18 songs, but only one song that's on the fourth side, the very end of the album, actually has singing to it. And that, of course, is the best song on the album. Of course, Louder Than Words, the hit single thingy. It's pretty kick-ass, although David Gilmour sounds like his voice is dying.
It's louder than words, this thing that we do. Louder than words, the weight on the
But you know what? This album feels like classic, good Pink Floyd. And Rick Wright and David Gilmour write just about everything together on this album. Almost no outside songwriters. This album musically, because it's all jams and improvisation that they recorded, feels like good classic Floyd. I'm talking about from like the 70s, the stuff that we all really liked. But the downside that stops this album from being as awesome as it should is that it's just left as the bits. They divided the giant spiff, I think they called it, the great spiff, into just 18 bits. There's a lot of really great parts that remind me of like Shine On You Crazy Diamond or other really kick-ass songs, Echoes and stuff. But I wish they had like added vocals or put some of these together, but I don't think they wanted to mess with it too much because Rick Wright died, and they said that the only reason that they released this album was to be like a testament and tribute to Rick Wright. So they kind of left it as it was, but added like a couple guitar solos and stuff. And I think that they added the vocals and stuff to louder than words. But you know what? There's not any terrible moments or bad or really okay moments on this album. It's all pretty cool bits. There's even a little part in the album that's from 1968 of Rick Wright playing the organ, which is cool that they captured that. So if you're not into instrumental music at all, completely avoid this one. But man, if you're into what made early Pink Floyd tick, the awesome psychedelic jams along with cool ambient buildups, this album is for you to check out because it is bare bones what makes them great. Thank you guys so much for watching this retrospective. I had a lot of fun doing this one, just like all of my other retrospectives. I hope you guys like this one quite a bit. It was harder to find some footage because, I don't know why, but they've been taking down a lot of footage, and a lot of their live footage from the early days is awful. Anyways, here's the worst to best albums.
Everyone you fight.